I invited my future daughter-in-law over, and she replaced me. That's how it felt, at least. One day, my house smelled like cinnamon and fresh laundry, my scent, my rhythm, and the next, it was lavender and perfume I didn't recognize. And somehow, I felt like a guest in my own home. It started so innocently, the way most betrayals do. I was happy, genuinely happy, when my son, Daniel, told me he'd met someone special. He'd been single for a while after moving out, and though I tried not to admit it, I worried about him being lonely. So when he walked into my kitchen that evening with a shy smile and said, "Mom, I think I've met the one," my heart swelled. I imagined the kind of woman I always hoped he'd find, kind, grounded, maybe a little soft-spoken, someone who'd love him for the gentle man he was. I didn't know then that I was about to invite a storm into our lives. Daniel brought her over the following Sunday for dinner. Her name was Sofia. She walked into my home like she'd always belonged there. Beautiful, yes. Polished, confident, with the kind of grace that fills a room before words ever do. She smiled warmly and handed me a box of pastries from the upscale bakery downtown. "I heard you like these," she said. I remember thinking, how thoughtful. I didn't know she'd been following my social media, picking up details I'd shared online. Dinner went smoothly, mostly. She laughed easily, complimented my cooking, and made Daniel beam with pride. "Isn't she amazing, Mom?" he said, and I nodded, smiling, though something in me stirred. She was almost too perfect. That night, after they left, I sat by the sink washing dishes. I caught my reflection in the kitchen window, tired eyes, graying hair escaping its bun, and I whispered to myself, "Don't be silly, Margaret. You're just not used to sharing him." But I didn't know how right I was, and how much of him I'd soon lose. Weeks later, Daniel asked if Sofia could spend more time with us, to get to know the family. Of course I agreed. I wanted to be the kind of mother-in-law who welcomed, not warned. So she started coming over every weekend. Sometimes she'd help me cook. Other times she'd bring her own recipes. Modern twists, she called them. My old wooden spice rack began to fill with fancy imported jars. The tablecloth changed from my simple cream cotton to a floral print she'd found on sale. Little things, tiny details. But every change made my house feel slightly less like mine. One Saturday, Daniel asked if Sofia could borrow my car. "Just for the day," he said. "She's taking her mom to a doctor's appointment." I hesitated, not because of the car, but because I'd just filled the tank that morning, planning to visit my sister. Still, I smiled and handed over the keys. "Just take care of her," I said. And yes, I meant the car. When they returned that evening, Sofia thanked me with that same polished smile. But the next morning, when I stepped outside, I noticed my car parked at an angle, the seat pushed all the way forward, perfume still lingering in the air. I sat there for a long minute, feeling something twist in my chest. It wasn't just that she'd used my car, it was that it didn't smell like mine anymore. Weeks turned into months, and my house slowly became a canvas painted in her colors. Daniel moved some of his things to her apartment, but they were still here often. Dinners, family gatherings, lazy Sundays. I found her clothes draped over the guest chair, her slippers by the door, her lipstick in my bathroom drawer. I told myself it was just temporary, that once they married, they'd have their own space. Then one afternoon she came by while Daniel was at work. "I hope you don't mind, but I thought I'd help you reorganize the kitchen. It'll make things easier for you." By the time she left, my entire pantry had been rearranged. Flour where sugar used to be, plates stacked by color instead of size, and my handwritten recipe cards, my mother's handwriting on yellowed paper, replaced with printed labels in neat cursive font. That night, I stood in front of my spice rack and couldn't find a single thing I needed. I wanted to cry, but I didn't. I just whispered, "It's fine, Margaret. She's just helping." But a quiet fear began to form, like a whisper that said, "You're being erased." The first real sting came a month later, at Daniel's engagement party. I'd helped plan it for weeks, ordered the catering, decorated the garden, even picked out the flowers. But when the day arrived, I realized everything had changed. The florist called me Sofia's mother-in-law, and the photographer asked her where to set up. My own sister leaned in and said, "You raised such a lovely girl," mistaking Sofia's coordination for my doing. I smiled through it all, clutching a glass of lemonade I didn't drink, nodding at compliments that weren't mine to take. When I looked across the garden, I saw Daniel, laughing with her, eyes soft, arm around his waist. He looked happy, and for a moment, that was enough to quiet the ache. Until I heard Sofia say, loud enough for her friends, but soft enough to sting, "I'm glad we're modernizing things around here. His mom's so traditional." Traditional. It was meant as a compliment, perhaps, but it sounded like obsolete. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through my house in the dark, running my hand along the walls, the furniture, the framed photos of birthdays and Christmases. Everything felt the same, yet utterly foreign. In the silence, I realized I'd stopped hearing Daniel's laughter the way I used to. I used to know his footsteps, his late-night fridge raids, and his quiet hums. Now I only heard Sofia's voice echoing in the hallways. And for the first time, I wondered, was I losing my son, or was I losing myself? The next morning, I tried to shake off the heaviness. I baked Daniel's favorite lemon loaf and brewed his favorite coffee, the same Saturday ritual we'd shared since his college days. But when they arrived, he barely touched his plate. "Oh, Sofia made pancakes earlier," he said, smiling at her like she'd hung the moon. She laughed softly, brushing a crumb from his collar. "He's spoiled now," she teased. I smiled back, pretending it didn't hurt. But inside, I felt a quiet panic rising, like a piece of me was slowly being folded away and replaced with hers. She wasn't malicious, not overtly. That was what made it worse. Everything she did had plausible kindness, every intrusion coated with sweetness. One day, she offered to help me modernize my wardrobe. "You'd look stunning in softer tones," she said, holding up a beige sweater. "You don't have to hide behind those dark colors." I laughed politely, even tried it on, but when I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. I didn't see warmth or elegance. I saw erasure, quiet, smiling erasure. It wasn't just my clothes or my kitchen anymore. It was Daniel. He'd started calling less, visiting without notice, and when he did come, she was always there, steering conversations, finishing his sentences. My son, who once shared everything with me, from heartbreaks to job frustrations, had become a guest. I tried to talk to him gently one evening. He'd stopped by alone to drop off some documents I needed. "Danny," I began, using his childhood nickname, "I feel like I hardly see you anymore, even when you're here." He looked up, startled. "What do you mean, Mom? I'm always around." I smiled softly. "Around, yes, but not with me." He frowned, uneasy. "You don't have to worry. Sofia and I just have a lot going on with wedding planning." I nodded, of course, but before I could say anything else, his phone buzzed. Her name flashed across the screen. He answered instantly. Voice soft, almost reverent. "Hey, love." I stood there, hands trembling just enough for the papers to rustle. When he hung up, he said, "I should go. She needs help with the seating chart." I wanted to ask, "And what about me? Where's my seat in your life now?" But I didn't. I just said, "Drive safe," and watched him walk away. After that, I began to notice little things, subtle shifts in how people treated me. Our family friends started inviting them instead of me to dinners. When the church committee organized charity events, they said, "We already spoke with Sofia." Even my bridge group, my safe circle of old friends, started making comments. "Your daughter-in-law is just so capable," one said. "She's really breathing new life into things," another added. Each word stung like a paper cut, small, almost invisible, but cumulative. The breaking point came unexpectedly. It was a Sunday afternoon, and Sofia called, asking if she could stop by to borrow a few things for the wedding. I said yes, thinking she meant tablecloths or decorations. When she arrived, she went straight to my jewelry box, the one Daniel's father gave me before he passed. She said, "These would look lovely with my dress. Do you mind if I wear them? Just something borrowed, of course." I hesitated. Those pearls weren't just jewelry. They were a piece of my marriage, a fragment of my youth. "I don't think I began." "Oh, come on," she interrupted, her tone still sweet but firmer now. "It would mean so much to Daniel if you were part of the day, even symbolically." I froze. That word, symbolically, as if that's all I was now, a symbol. I handed her the box. My hand shook as I did. She smiled brightly, kissed my cheek, and said, "You're such a gem." When she left, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the indent her hand left on the quilt. For the first time, I cried. Quiet, unpretty tears that came from somewhere deep. It wasn't about pearls. It was about being replaced, inch by inch, by someone who'd studied me well enough to become me, only shinier, newer, younger. The wedding drew near, and every decision seemed to erase my touch further. The menu, hers. The guest list, hers. The song for the mother-son dance, hers. Even my dress had been suggested by her. Pale lavender, soft, modest. "It'll complement the theme," she'd said. I nodded, even though I hated it. But the final blow came a week before the wedding, when I overheard a conversation I wasn't meant to hear. They were at my house for dinner. I'd stepped into the hallway to fetch a photo album. As I approached the kitchen, I heard Sofia's voice, low, laughing. "She still uses paper calendars, can you believe that? I told Daniel, once we move, we'll update everything, make the place more functional." Daniel chuckled softly. "You'll fix her whole system before she even notices." They both laughed. My heart dropped. Move? I waited until the sound of plates clinking filled the silence before walking back in, forcing a smile. "Dinner's ready," I said quietly. Neither of them noticed the tremor in my voice. That night, after they left, I opened Daniel's old bedroom closet. It was mostly empty, a few shirts, a box of childhood photos, a baseball glove. But tucked in the corner was a moving company brochure. On the cover, "Your new chapter starts here." I sat on the floor holding it, the room echoing with memories. The sound of Daniel's laughter, his teenage music, his midnight whispers on the phone. And I realized they weren't just taking over my space. They were planning to take me out of it entirely. The next morning, I brewed coffee and sat by the window, watching the light spill across the kitchen. I whispered, "No more." It wasn't anger that filled me. It was clarity, sharp, cold, liberating. For the first time, I saw what I had become, a woman orbiting other people's lives, waiting for scraps of belonging. I decided that day I would reclaim my space, quietly, gracefully, but fully. I didn't know how yet, but I knew one thing for sure. Sofia might have replaced my routines, my rituals, and my reflection in my son's eyes, but she would not replace me. The following week, the house was unusually quiet. No messages, no visits, no phone calls, just the faint ticking of the clock and the echo of a life once full. But in that silence, something began to shift. I started reclaiming small corners of myself. First, the kitchen. I took down the sterile glass bowls Sofia had organized for me and brought back my old chipped ceramic ones, the ones Daniel and I used to bake brownies in when he was 8. Then, the garden. I tore out the neat rows of succulents she'd planted for simplicity and replaced them with wildflowers, messy, defiant, beautiful. Every act felt like breathing again, like exhaling someone else's perfume and remembering the scent of my own skin. A few days later, Sofia called. "Hi, Mom," she said. She'd started calling me that recently, as if the word itself could bridge whatever distance existed between us. "I was thinking, after the wedding, we could redo your living room, make it brighter, more, contemporary." I smiled, though she couldn't see it. "I appreciate the offer, dear," I said softly, "but I think I'll keep it as it is. It feels like home this way." There was a small pause, not long enough to be rude, but long enough to register surprise. Then she said, "Of course, whatever makes you comfortable." When we hung up, I felt a quiet triumph bloom inside me. For the first time, I'd said no, and it felt like winning a war no one knew was happening. The wedding came faster than I expected. The venue was breathtaking, a restored countryside manor draped in fairy lights and white roses. Everything shimmered with her taste. I stood near the entrance, clutching a small clutch bag and trying to steady my hands. Guests arrived in clusters, laughing, hugging, admiring the decor. And then I saw him, Daniel, standing at the altar, radiant, proud, heartbreakingly handsome. When our eyes met, he smiled, and in that moment, all the bitterness dissolved. For a heartbeat, he was still my boy, the one who once held my hand crossing the street, who scraped his knees and cried into my lap. Then the music started. Sofia walked in, and the entire room seemed to inhale. She was stunning, a soft ivory gown, pearls glinting under the light. My pearls. She looked at me briefly, smiling, not cruelly, but knowingly. When the vows began, I felt a single tear roll down my cheek, not out of sadness, but something deeper. A realization. I wasn't losing him. I was simply being moved to the edges. The way dawn yields to morning, still present but dimmer. At the reception, they danced under a canopy of lights. Daniel twirled her, laughing, and I watched from my table, hands folded in my lap. When the DJ called for the mother-son dance, my breath caught. The song began, not the one I'd chosen, but her selection. A slow, polished melody about love letting go. Daniel approached, smiling. "May I have this dance?" I took his hand, my eyes glistening. "Always." As we moved, I leaned in and whispered, "You've built something beautiful, my love. Just remember, beauty means nothing if it erases where it came from." He looked at me, puzzled, then softened. "You'll always be where I came from, Mom." And for the first time in months, I believed him. After the wedding, life returned to its quiet rhythm, but something new was growing. Not bitterness, not grief, but distance with dignity. Daniel and Sofia moved into a new house across town. They visited occasionally, sometimes together, sometimes he came alone. At first, their calls were polite, measured, then slowly warmer.
Once, when Sofia came by to return the pearls, she lingered a little longer than usual. "I wanted to thank you," she said, placing the box on the table, "for everything." I smiled faintly. "Take them. They suit you." She hesitated. "No, they belong to you." Our eyes met, and for the first time there was no tension, just two women, connected by the same man, finally understanding each other's boundaries. I realized then that she hadn't meant to erase me. She was simply building her place the only way she knew how, by filling the space I'd left empty when I forgot to keep living for myself. Months passed, seasons shifted. I started painting again, something I hadn't since Daniel was a boy. My first piece was simple: a table set for two, one chair empty, sunlight pouring through lace curtains. It wasn't lonely, it was peaceful. Sometimes I caught myself smiling for no reason, while watering the plants, or folding laundry, or walking past Daniel's old room. I'd learned something profound in that silence. You can love someone deeply without losing yourself in the process. One Sunday afternoon, Daniel stopped by alone. No calls, no warning, just like old times. He found me in the garden, kneeling among the wildflowers. "Smells like summer in here," he said, crouching beside me. I looked up, laughing softly. "Or chaos?" He smiled. "You've always made chaos look like art." We sat quietly for a while. Then he said, "Sophia and I were talking about you last night." "Oh?" He nodded. "She said she finally understands why I love small things, the way I fold napkins, the songs I hum when I'm nervous. She said, 'You got that from your mother, didn't you?' I looked at him, heart swelling. "And what did you say?" He grinned. I said, "Yeah, everything good I got from her." The sunlight shifted then, soft and golden. I reached for his hand, holding it like I used to when he was little. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel replaced. I felt remembered. That night, as I sat by the window with a cup of tea, I looked at my reflection in the glass. For months, I dreaded that image, the older woman fading in the background of someone else's story. But now, I saw something different. A survivor of subtle wars, a keeper of histories, a woman who had lost nothing that truly mattered. Because love, when it's real, doesn't replace. It expands. And maybe, just maybe, Sophia wasn't here to erase me. She was here to remind me that my story wasn't over.
It was nearly 6 months after the wedding when the quiet rhythm of my life changed again, not with chaos, but with a whisper. It began on an ordinary Tuesday, the kind of day that passes unnoticed, tucked between chores and errands. The phone rang just as I was setting the kettle on the stove. It was Daniel. "Mom, can we come by this evening?" he asked. His voice was calm, but there was a strain beneath it, a tremor I recognized instantly. "Of course," I said, my chest tightening. "Is everything all right?" There was a pause. Then, "We just need to talk." They arrived just before sunset. Sophia looked different. The usual polish was gone, no carefully pinned hair, no bright lipstick. Just a pale face and hands fidgeting with her wedding band. Daniel stood beside her, quiet, watchful. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table that had once held my son's homework, birthday cakes, and countless cups of tea shared with strangers who became family. Only this time, it felt like a confession table. Sophia spoke first. I owe you an apology, she said, voice trembling. I didn't say anything. I just listened, the way mothers do when words are too fragile to interrupt. She took a breath. I haven't been honest with you or with Daniel. Daniel looked up sharply. Sofia! No, she said gently, her hand trembling. Let me. She turned to me. When Daniel and I got engaged, I wanted so badly to be perfect, to fit in, to belong. But I thought the only way to do that was to replace you, to become what he loved first. Her eyes brimmed with tears. That's why I started copying things. Your recipes, your perfume, your friends, even your pearls. I thought if I mirrored you, I'd earn his love the same way you did. But all I did was lose myself and hurt you. The silence that followed felt heavier than anger. It was grief, but not for her. For both of us. Daniel's voice was quiet. I didn't know. I thought she was just trying to help. I swallowed the lump in my throat. And now? Sofia wiped her eyes. Now I realize I can't build love on imitation. I need to start being who I am, not who I think I'm supposed to be. Her words hit something deep inside me. Because I knew that feeling. I'd lived it, spending years defining myself through others, through my husband, through my son, through roles I didn't know how to outgrow. Maybe we weren't rivals after all. Maybe we were mirrors, reflecting the same hunger to be seen. That night after they left, I walked out to the garden. The air was cool, the flowers bending under the weight of the evening dew. I thought about everything Sofia had said. I realized I had been holding on to my pain like a souvenir, proof that I still mattered. But maybe the real power wasn't in being irreplaceable. It was in knowing that I didn't need to be. Weeks turned into months. The visits continued, softer, warmer this time. Sofia began inviting me into their world, piece by piece, not out of guilt, but out of gratitude. Once she asked me to teach her Daniel's favorite dish, my slow-cooked lamb stew. As we cooked together, she smiled and said, "He told me he used to sit on the counter and watch you make this." I laughed. He used to dip his fingers in the sauce when he thought I wasn't looking. We both laughed then. Not as mother and daughter-in-law, not as opponents, but as women finally standing on even ground. One afternoon, she came by alone. She said, "I brought you something." She handed me a small wrapped box. Inside was a delicate silver pendant, a tiny tree with 2 branches. "One for you," she said softly, "and one for me, roots in the same soil." I traced the pendant with my thumb, my eyes stinging. For the first time, I felt the invisible wall between us dissolve. It wasn't a sudden redemption. There were still moments, small, sharp ones, when I'd feel that old ache of displacement. Like when Daniel called her sweetheart in the tone he once used with me, or when they spoke in quick, intimate whispers I wasn't part of.
But those moments no longer broke me, because I had found something sturdier than belonging. I had found peace. The truth is, love changes shape over time. It grows, stretches, sometimes even fractures. But the pieces don't disappear. They just settle in new places. And sometimes the person you think came to replace you is really the one who came to remind you who you were before you forgot. That summer, I hosted a dinner. Just the three of us. We ate under the string lights Daniel helped me hang in the garden. Laughter mingled with the smell of jasmine and grilled herbs. At one point, Sofia raised her glass and said, "To new beginnings and old roots." Daniel smiled at her, then at me. "To the women who taught me how to love." I felt the tears then. Not of pain, but of something gentler. Maybe this was how healing looked. Quiet, ordinary, beautiful. When they left that night, I lingered in the garden a little longer. The moonlight caught the silver pendant at my neck. I whispered to the stars, as if they might answer. I didn't lose my son. I just gained another kind of daughter. And for the first time, I believed every word.
The change between Sofia and me didn't stay hidden for long. Our little town had a way of noticing things. The same neighbors who once whispered about how cold things seemed between my son's wife and me now commented on how warm and close we'd become. At the grocery store, Mrs. Patel leaned in as she handed me my change. "I saw you and your daughter-in-law together last weekend. You two looked like best friends." I smiled. "We're working on it." And we were. Slowly, quietly, one conversation, one shared recipe, one honest apology at a time. But the truth about what had happened between us, about the months of silent rivalry, of invisible hurt, was something that eventually made its way out too. It started during a family barbecue at Daniel's house. Daniel had invited some friends, a few relatives, and neighbors. It was the first big gathering since the wedding. I almost didn't go. Old insecurities still lingered like ghosts. But Sofia called that morning. "Please come, Mom. We're family now, and it won't feel complete without you." The way she said Mom, soft, without effort, melted something in me. So I went. The yard was filled with laughter, music, and the scent of grilled corn and chicken. Sofia was hosting like a natural, greeting everyone, refilling glasses, laughing freely. At one point, someone joked, "Sofia, you've really taken charge of this house. Daniel's mom must have taught you everything." The air grew still for a moment. I saw Sofia glance my way. Then she smiled gently. "Actually," she said, "I tried to take her place once. It was the worst mistake I ever made." You could have heard a pin drop. But she didn't stop there. She continued, I thought I had to replace her to belong here, but I learned belonging doesn't come from competition. It comes from respect. I nearly lost the chance to have her in my life because I was too busy trying to be her. Her voice cracked just a little. Now, I know better. She's not someone to replace. She's someone to learn from. There was silence, the kind that follows truth. Daniel looked at her with something close to awe, and then he turned to me, eyes full of pride. Everyone started clapping. Someone raised a glass, and in that moment, the narrative that once painted me as the difficult mother-in-law shifted, without me having to say a single word. Later that evening, after the guests had gone, Sofia and I sat on the porch. The air smelled of smoke and lemon from the grill. Fireflies danced in the darkness. "You didn't have to tell everyone," I said softly. She replied, "I did, because hiding what happened keeps the shame alive, and I don't want us to live with that anymore." I nodded slowly. "You're brave, you know that?" She smiled faintly. "I learned from the best." For a while, we just sat there, listening to the quiet hum of the night. It struck me then how different she looked from the girl who first came into our home. She wasn't trying to fit anymore. She was just being herself, grounded, confident, real. And I realized I'd changed too. The woman who once needed to control everything, to feel secure, seen, needed, had learned the grace of letting go. Months later, when Daniel and Sofia announced they were expecting their first child, I cried harder than I expected to. Not just because I was going to be a grandmother, but because of what it meant. New roots, new life, a new chapter, one that wasn't built on rivalry or pain, but on understanding. The day they told me, Sofia placed my hand on her stomach and whispered, "I want our child to know both of us, the women who taught me what family really means." It was the kind of moment that rewrites everything that came before it. After that, I started volunteering at a local women's group. Most of the women there were mothers or mothers-in-law struggling with family conflicts. When I shared parts of my story, the insecurity, the hurt, the silent competition, I saw recognition in their eyes. One woman said, "I thought I was the only one who felt replaced by my daughter-in-law." I told her, "You're not replaced. You're just evolving. The role changes, but your worth doesn't." That sentence became something of a mantra for all of us. One Sunday afternoon, months later, I was sitting in the garden again, the same place where I had once sat crying after that first terrible confrontation. But now the air smelled of jasmine and rosemary, and laughter drifted from the house. Sofia was inside baking a cake, and Daniel was fixing the fence. The world, for once, felt right. I realized peace doesn't come when life goes back to how it was. It comes when you learn to love the version of life that exists now. The one where your son grows up, where your home becomes quieter, where the woman you once saw as an intruder becomes someone you can call daughter, not because you have to, but because you want to. That evening, Sofia handed me a slice of cake and said, "I'm naming her after you if it's a girl." I laughed through tears. "Don't do that to the poor child. Let her be her own person." She smiled. "She will be, but I want her to carry a piece of the woman who taught me how to be strong and gentle at the same time."
And for the first time in a long time, I felt whole. Sometimes the people who come into our lives to challenge us are really there to teach us how to grow. And sometimes what feels like being replaced is really just being reborn.
When I look back on everything that happened, from the first time Sofia stepped into my home to the day she called me mom, I realize that life rarely unfolds the way we plan it. I thought motherhood ended when my son got married. I thought my worth was tied to being needed, to being the one who cooked, guided, and held the family together. But what I've learned is that love isn't about holding on. It's about allowing others to grow, even if that means growing apart for a while. Sofia didn't come into my life to replace me. She came to remind me that I was more than the roles I played. And maybe, just maybe, I was meant to teach her the same. There was a time I looked at her and saw competition. Now when I see her, I see continuation. A younger woman trying to find her place in the world, just as I once did. That's the thing about family. It's not perfect. It's messy, complicated, sometimes painful, but it's also where we learn the deepest lessons about forgiveness, patience, and love that doesn't need to prove itself. If you've ever felt replaced by a new daughter-in-law, a new friend, or even a younger colleague, I want you to know this. You haven't lost your value. You've just entered a new chapter. And sometimes the only way to keep your place in someone's life is to stop fighting for it and start trusting that love will find its balance again. When I hold my granddaughter now, I whisper stories of the women who came before her. Strong, stubborn, loving, imperfect women who made mistakes but kept their hearts open. Because that's what I want her to learn, that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply forgives. Would you have done what I did? Would you have opened your heart again to the person who once tried to take your place? Tell me what you think in the comments below. I'll be reading them, just like always. And if this story touched you, remember to share it. You never know who might need to hear that healing is still possible, even between the most unlikely hearts.